Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Healing with Confidence podcast. In today's interview, we talk with Morley Robbins, a mineral expert and the creator of the Root Cause Protocol, a health approach focused on restoring mineral balance, especially magnesium, copper, and iron to support cellular energy and metabolic health. A former hospital executive and wellness educator, Morley's helped thousands understand how mineral dysregulation drives chronic disease and how to heal by nourishing the body at the root, which we are all about here at the Healing with Confidence podcast. So without further ado, here's the episode.
One more thing. Do you want to boost your energy, mental clarity, and focus in just 30 days? Click the link below so that you can download my free guide with 6 simple changes that are going to help you feel amazing and confident. And if you're ready to dive deeper and uncover the root causes of your symptoms, book your free 45-minute exploration call today at nutritionwithconfidence.com. All right, enjoy the interview.
The first question I've got for you is, who is Morley Robbins? What do you do in the world?
What do I do? I stir the pot. Um, I've been the word agitator is probably too strong, but I'm not a conformist per se. I grew up in a home where there was a lot of illness, but I grew up with a dad without a dad, so I didn't have a governor on my behavior, and I wasn't a troublemaker, but I question things a lot, and I have an older sister. She's no longer with us, but the latter born in the family gets to do things differently than the firstborn. Firstborn follows the rules, and I didn't follow the rules. And I think what if asked, and maybe really the best way to answer your question is, what have I done in the last 17 years? I've given people permission to question the narrative. Because the narrative is completely corrupt and bankrupt. And I think many of us who either were awake or woke up in 2020, we know what's going on. We have a much better idea of what's going on. But most people are still asleep. Mm-hmm. But I think what I did as I got more involved in social media was challenge the narrative. And I've come up with a new way to try to crystallize who is Morley Robbins. I'm a cross between Toto from The Wizard of Oz and David, who slayed the giant. Mm. And so Toto, because he pulls back the green curtain and reveals the whole thing's a scam. Mm. And David, because this is a big copper ball, and I know exactly where to throw it to bring down Big Pharma.
And for those who can't visually see, Morley was holding up a copper ball about the size of a baseball there, maybe a little smaller.
A little smaller than a baseball. And the thing is, we were designed perfectly by our maker and Mother Nature. And that design has been compromised over the last century. And most people don't know that. And I didn't know that. I mean, I was born in 52, and you don't want to think about my diet back then. It was pretty intense, very sugar laden, as you can imagine. Yeah. And I don't know, I was graced with an epiphany in my 50s that really revolved around a frozen shoulder, which got me to my now wife, Dr. Liz, who's a chiropractor, who introduced me to natural healing, and a phrase I'd never heard before, which is the innate healer. I'd never heard that in 32 years of working in a hospital. And I thought to myself, if there's an innate healer, why do we have millions of doctors around the world? There's 10 million there's 10 million MDs. There's probably 30 million doctors when you include homeopaths and osteopaths and acupuncturists. There are a lot of doctors on the planet. well, why do we have that if there's an innate healer? So I wanted to find out who the innate healer is. And that's really what the book is about. The book is cure, right?
Mm-hmm.
The box around the CU is intentional
Yep.
for those who can see it. Whoops, there we go. And I firmly believe that we have this internal capacity to heal ourselves. And we were designed for sovereignty. We were not designed for symptom relief. And so it's what do we need to do to grant and execute that sovereignty agenda? That's really who I am.
Mm.
And I've learned a lot in the last 16, 17 years. And I'm amazed at how the knowledge just keeps flowing every morning. And it's been just a phenomenal journey that I would never have anticipated. So
Yeah.
it's been a lot of fun.
Incredible.
Well, yeah, and then let's dive into it. So before we hit recording, I was saying Natalie's the intellectual. I do my best to understand these complex topics that you present. But
Right.
so you were talking about the importance of copper and likening it to a car battery. Will you first start with like what led you to discover the importance of copper? How'd you land on this epiphany?
Uh, I started with magnesium. It's really where I started. And again, when I had that first encounter with Dr. Liz, she said innate healer. I said I got to find out who that is. And one of Dr. Liz's clients was a psychologist, and she said, I think it'd be a lot of fun if you would use paradoxical intent to talk about what you're learning. And I said, well, I don't know what you just said. She said, reverse psychology. I said, oh, okay. And so the very first book I wrote was just a little book about that big, and it was called Let's Get Fat. And it was a 10-step plan. How do you get fat? And I sold it for $5.
That's awesome.
And it was a lot of fun. It was all, again, written in reverse psychology.
Mm.
And then I wrote one called Let's Break Bones. You want to break your bones? Here's how you break a bone.
Yeah.
And then through dietary, abuse. But the one that was the real breakthrough was a lot of people worry about having a heart attack. So the title of that one was Let's Make a Heart Attack. And it was a 10-step plan. And all of these articles appeared in a publication in the Chicago area called The Monthly Aspectarian, which is a magazine about astrology. They just thought I had this riotous sense of humor, so they would publish these things. And I don't know if any of that is still available, but I wrote the Let's Make a Heart Attack, shared it with another client. Said, could you look this over? And it was, again, a 10-step plan. But 7 of the 10 steps came from the American Heart Association. So the American Heart Association is telling you, do this so you don't get a heart attack, wink, wink. And I was able to prove in the literature that it was going to cause a heart attack. And step number 8 was remove magnesium from your body.
Yeah.
And so I put together the article, shared it with this client, and she took it home one weekend, came back on the following Monday, and she said, this is really funny. She said, this is really good. It really deserves to get some degree of visibility. And she said, but I can't help but think that step number 8 is more important than you think it is, which was remove magnesium from your body. So I thought, yeah, maybe you're right. So I bought Carolyn Dean's book, The Magnesium Miracle. And I was fascinated I didn't know anything about minerals. I had no, this was like a babe in the woods. And I just spent 32 years working in hospitals. And as you read that book by Carolyn Dean, you find out why everyone's in the hospitals because they're magnesium deficient. And so I started out with, well, everyone needs more magnesium and everything's going to be fine. And so I started out with that drumbeat. And a practitioner pulled me aside at a meeting and he said, Morley, he said, if it was that simple, we would have figured it out. And in my arrogance and my hubris, I said, well, you don't seem to understand the way I do. And I said, I think that's all we need to do. Well, he was right. I was wrong.
Mm.
And I stayed with it. That famous quote by Einstein, I'm not a genius. I just stayed with the problem longer. And
Mm.
I realized that there's a reason why we lose magnesium. It's always to stress. If you have stress in your world, you're going to have oxidative stress in your body. I didn't know that. I didn't
Mm.
know that our reaction to our insane lifestyle created changes in oxygen chemistry in our body.
Mm.
And so I started to really become quite a student of stress, and then became a student of oxidative stress. Then found out, oh, well, iron is heavily implicated in oxidative stress. And then, oh, there's this thing called copper. It goes back to the great oxygen event billions of years ago. And copper has a unique ability to manage iron and oxygen at the same time without creating a problem. Well, that gap between magnesium and copper was about 5 years. 5 years of daily research, reading for 2 to 3 hours a day, and 7 days a week, and just feeling almost driven. I was like Richard Dreyfuss from Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I'm building these,
Mm.
mountains in my kitchen, and I'm just like obsessed with figuring out what happened. And when you get to the copper stage, you're like, no one's talking about this. This
Mm.
is the best kept secret on the planet, and it's really serious now
Mhm.
because I can give chapter and verse how the farming industry, the
Mhm.
food processing industry, and the pharmaceutical industry have vectored in on minerals in general, but copper in particular.
Mm.
And we live in a world now where the meme that runs medicine is you're anemic and you're copper toxic. And everyone's afraid of becoming copper toxic. And let me give you some perspective about copper. Um, when a woman gets pregnant, this research goes back to 1928. Average scientist named Hans Krebs, you've probably heard of the Krebs cycle. He's a
Mhm.
really big name.
Kind of
He
big.
was kind of big. And between 1926 and 1930, he worked with a guy named Otto Warburg, another big name in
Yes.
medicine and science. And what's really comical is the articles that they wrote during that period and the arguments they would get into about whose idea the study was. It's just two clashing egos trying to figure out who's smarter. But Hans Krebs in 1928 figures out that women have a real need for copper, especially when they become pregnant. And in fact, the copper level doubles in a pregnant woman's body as soon as the egg and the sperm connect. There's this explosion of copper and the copper protein, ceruloplasmin, and it's absolutely fascinating. And I'm really trying to understand why does that happen? But yet we live in a world that thinks that copper is toxic. Well, why would Mother Nature want the pregnant woman's body to suddenly become this bank of copper and ceruloplasmin if it's a toxin?
Mhm. Mhm.
And then just to add to the insanity, you've got a plant. I don't know whether it looks like it's real. I
Yes,
hope it's
it
real.
is. It's real.
Okay.
It is
And
real.
there's a whole
It's
okay.
potatoes.
And there's a whole bunch of real plants, I'm sure, outside of your home. And
Mhm.
what color are they all? They're all green, right?
Mm. Yes.
A lot of leaves and stuff, especially at this time of year. Well, all of those plants have an enzyme called rubisco, and you've never heard of it. It's the most dominant enzyme. It's the most prevalent enzyme on planet Earth. Rubisco, and it stands for ribulose diphosphate carboxylase. I'm sure you're going to remember that, right, Andrew? You got that right?
Definitely.
Yeah, yeah.
Been there.
Yeah, exactly. You'll remember Nabisco and then change Nabisco to Rubisco, and you're fine.
There we go.
And you can win trivia games and stuff like that by talking about rubisco. So rubisco, most prevalent enzyme on the planet, because of photosynthesis, is copper dependent. And what does that enzyme do? It's really cool. It takes the CO2 molecule, the one that's supposedly going to kill us, right? And it splits. Carboxylase means it's splitting carbon dioxide, and it splits carbon dioxide. It sends the carbon into the sugars of the plant. That's really important.
Mm-hmm.
What does it do with the oxygen? Oh, it lets it out of the plant so we can breathe.
Mm.
It's like this. Oh my God! And you know when I learned this? You'd think I learned it a long time ago. I learned it about a month ago. I'm like, oh my gosh. And so then, but when you couple that enzyme with the enzyme inside our mitochondria, and it's called cytochrome C oxidase, it's complex 4 of our mitochondria. And just to put a little perspective on it, there are only 3 numbers, 1, 2, and a lot, right? Well, there's actually 40 quadrillion mitochondria in our body. So that's 15 zeros. And I know Andrew's digging all this data. It's just really, you're getting you all excited, I know. But the thing is, there's a lot of complex 4 in humans.
Mm-hmm.
And you got 8 billion of them. So guess what? That's another really big enzyme. And what runs cytochrome C oxidase? Copper. And so what is its nickname is the COX enzyme, COX. So what does the COX enzyme do? It takes that oxygen that the plant just gave you and it puts it in a stove. And then the copper in that enzyme is a chef that slices and dices the oxygen, adds 4 hydrogen protons, adds 4 electrons. And like that, it becomes 2 molecules of H2O, 2 molecules of water. And when that happens, it releases the energy molecule so we can live.
Mm.
And the creation of water is the obligate reaction to allow the release of energy. And so the mitochondria are not energy furnaces, they're water wheels. And so when you want to hydrate your body, you produce energy. And you produce it naturally when you have copper, because copper is in the center of the mitochondria.
Mm.
And if things don't go well, there isn't enough copper there, then the water wheels become Ferris wheels because the iron starts to build up inside the mitochondria. It turns out that the mitochondria, it isn't a power plant, it's a smithy. It's recycling iron all the time, making new heme and making new iron sulfur clusters, but it takes energy to do that. So all this energy that we think we're using so we can go run a race or do whatever we're going to do, most of the energy is going to recycle iron. No one's ever heard that. And so this concept of water wheels becoming Ferris wheels, that's the aging process.
Mm-hmm.
I've got more Ferris wheels in my 72-year-old body than you guys have in your 30-something bodies, whatever, however old you are. And so aging is not complicated. It's just iron accumulation, period. Mm-hmm. And so iron causes aging. Copper causes longevity.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. Mm-hmm. And the planet is run by a 3-ring circuit: copper, iron, and oxygen. And if they don't play well together, you're going to accelerate your aging. That's it. That's the whole kit and caboodle. And once you understand that, and the again, another one of my favorite sayings by Einstein is, if you can't explain it to a 6-year-old, you don't understand it. Mm-hmm. You really don't.
That's great.
And that's really what I've worked to do is that, I can dance and start talking about Rubisco and stuff like that, but that just goes over people's head. Yeah. But when I get people to realize how important these minerals are, but they need to be in proper symmetry with each other, and that this thing called oxygen that we take for granted, it's the second most reactive element on the planet, but it's only 21% of the air we breathe. But it's not our friend. It's a poison. And it needs to be turned into water so it doesn't cause rust inside our body. And it's like, once
Yeah.
people understand that, they're like, wow, so then this copper thing might be a good thing. Yeah, it is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's flipping the whole narrative to get people to realize that they're not anemic, they're copper deficient. And what's a classic clinical sign of copper deficiency? Anemia.
Awesome. Yeah.
And copper's the general,
Mm-hmm.
and iron is the foot soldier.
Yeah.
You don't need to be in the army to know that generals are more important than foot soldiers.
Right.
And so it's just getting people to appreciate the beauty and the majesty of copper metabolism. It's
Mm-hmm.
just really exciting. So
Yeah.
so
I think,
so thanks for asking.
yeah. When I read your work and when I've listened to you, it sparks off a lot of connections for me that I think can help people understand what you're saying. Because if you've learned anything about breath work,
Yeah,
you start to realize in James Nestor's book, Breath,
yeah,
he talks about the importance of CO2 as
absolutely.
a signaling molecule to our cells. And it actually helps us get the oxygen into the cell to be used in this process by our mitochondria, the power plants, or the more. I like your imagery of it more as a water wheel. It still creates
Mhm.
energy, but has a yeah makes a lot of sense with some other offshoots, but we don't need to go down that rabbit trail. But we get the
Yeah,
oxygen into our cell because of CO2, and we're using that oxygen. If we don't use it, it becomes oxidative damage in our cells, right? And around
mhm.
our bodies. So that's
That's
that
exactly it.
connection that you're saying. And you talk a lot so much about the connection to agriculture and how this has been the issues that we are seeing with copper today are becoming more prevalent because of the many years of poor agricultural management
Yeah.
using chemicals that actually deplete magnesium in the soil. So it makes sense that we all know we're all magnesium deficient,
Right.
and but then it got you closer and closer to. Can you describe that? What happens to with the agricultural chemicals like glyphosate? What is that doing to our soil with the minerals?
Okay. Andrew, get out your notepad. Come on.
Ready?
Got it.
Okay, right. So, so this is the work of Don Huber, who's a professor emeritus at Purdue University. And he's been studying Roundup glyphosate for a lot of years, probably 30 or 40 years. There's a it was patented as a industrial pipe cleaner. Industrial plants have pipes that get filled with minerals, it gets corrosive, and they got to clean it out, right? It's a picture of literally a pipe cleaner. So
Mm,
somewhere along the line, there was one plant where the runoff from this glyphosate was killing the vegetation outside of the plant. And someone said, hey, wait, we've got an herbicide here. And that was, we're talking about like in the 1960s when that happened. So suddenly, the whole concept of Roundup changed, and it went from the plant to the farm, industrial plant to the farm, and it's known to be a mineral chelator. What Dr. Huber did was was focus on the kinetics, the speed with which the minerals come out of the soil or get bound up in the soil. And so um, we know about earthquakes, and earthquakes are measured on a logarithmic scale. So if you're in an earthquake and it's an earthquake of 3, dishes rattle and everyone's fine. But if you're in an earthquake of 12, nobody survives. Everything's gone at that point. So Dr. Huber put the speed of mineral chelation on a time frame with which it's bound up in the soil. And so glyphosate chelates calcium and magnesium at a 3. If I remember correctly, I think it's 3.3. And so, okay, that's not bad. Iron and zinc is at an 8.9. Oh, well, that's a whole lot faster. And it chelates copper at 11.9. So what does that mean? It means that copper is coming out 1 billion times faster than calcium and magnesium. Copper is coming out 1,000 times faster than iron and zinc. Now, here's the problem. Again, we're back to big numbers. We're talking about 1 billion times faster, 1,000 times faster. We don't know what that means. What's the fastest you've ever driven a car?
I don't know.
Yeah, when I was in high school, I'd say I got up to 100.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I got my mom's Mercedes 350 SL up to 140. So
Oh.
I was going twice the speed limit, right? Thank God the police weren't around. But so that was twice as fast, right? That's pretty fast. And when I was a little boy, a guy named Chuck Yeager broke the speed barrier. He went 10 times the speed of sound, which is a big deal. I was like, wow, that was amazing. That a plane, or he was actually he was on a rocket, is what he was. But that's only 10 times. And so we can't relate to 1,000 times faster. We can't relate to 1 billion times faster. We can't comprehend it. So when you don't understand it, we say, well, it can't be important because I don't understand it. So we just let it go. No, this is really important. This speed of binding is, I think we're facing extinction level events because we don't have access to copper. We got a problem. Houston, we got a problem. And I think there are a lot of people who are increasingly aware of this. But when you couple glyphosate with high fructose corn syrup, which is not your friend, and it's everywhere, and then couple it with third generation antibiotics, which do what? Oh, yeah, they chelate copper. Ding, ding, ding. Because they're trying to take the copper away from the bacteria. Wink, wink. Do you know what mitochondria are called? They have another name. They're not just called mitochondria.
I forget what they're called, but they are somewhat related to our bacteria. I mean, they communicate with our bacteria all the time.
They're called purple bacteria.
Cool.
Why are they purple? Because complex 4, where this stove is turning oxygen into water, it's the color of the sky. It's sky blue. And what's really important is for the mitochondria to produce red light to stop the nitric oxide that wants to stop the transaction to make water. That's why red light therapy is so useful, especially in a copper deficient body, because if you don't have copper, you can't produce the red light. And so what does blue and red light make? Purple bacteria. And so the antibiotics that are being used are taking the copper from the bacteria. Wink, wink. Get it? It doesn't stop at the pathogen. It's going to attack anything that's a bacteria. And so one of the most powerful copper chelators on the planet is something called penicillamine. We've heard of penicillin, you know. God bless the scientist, and I'm blanking on his name right now, that left his lab, left the petri dishes so they could make mold that killed the bacteria that he was trying to grow. Sir Edward Fleming, I think, Andrew Fleming or something like that. And I think he got a Nobel Prize for that, for leaving his petri dishes. Oh, you're brilliant. So, but in any event, penicillin was born from that event. Well, what's the first step in breaking down penicillin? Is to make penicillamine. And penicillamine chelates copper out of the bacteria. That's why they die, because you're taking the copper out of them. Like, wow, that would be nice to. Wouldn't that be fun to learn that in medical school?
So amazing.
No, it is. So it's just these fundamentals are
Yes.
unknown. There's just
Yeah.
they're
And so what are the early signs for someone who is copper deficient? Like, what are the symptoms people are going to experience
right.
that we're seeing today? So why are people,
So what's the
why,
title of my book? What's the title of my book?
cure?
Cure what? Your
Oh, your
fatigue.
fatigue. Yes.
It's the number one reason why people go see their doctor.
Mm.
Fatigue.
I'm feeling tired.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so where is that fatigue coming from? If the water wheels are not releasing the energy, then you get tired. You start to build up with exhaust. And and then we use the phrase, I feel exhausted, right? And
Mm-hmm.
we don't even know what it means. It's a very prescriptive term.
Yes.
And so there's a famous, he's a geneticist, biologist at Children's Hospital of Pennsylvania. His name is Douglas Wallace. He's a really smart guy.
Mm-hmm.
He's the guy that figured out that we get our mitochondrial DNA from our mom. And that's why my kids, my three oldest kids were very gifted athletes, not because of their old man. I'm a horrible athlete, but their mom and her lineage were good athletes. So she gave them great mitochondria, and they put it to good use. Um, but the thing is, Douglas Wallace, every scientist has a signature article, the one that really defined them as a researcher, as a thinker, as a scientist, whatever. And in 2005, he wrote a very important article about cellular energy deficiency. And in the very first sentence, he makes the point that clinicians don't seem to understand cellular energy deficiency, and they don't. I would go so far as to say that doctors, and I'm not just picking on any class, it's all faiths and persuasions. Doctors are not taught how energy is made. They're not taught how blood is made. They're not taught how bones are made. They're not taught how babies are made. It's really, really cool stuff that takes place. And they're not taught how hormones get activated.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's a very bold assertion for me to say that. They're not taught about energy or bone or blood or blah. How do I know that? Because all five of them require copper. And doctors are not taught about copper in medical school. Why? Because it kills the business incentive of their handling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's no money in copper replete human beings.
Mm-hmm.
There's no money in a dead person, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? There's no money in a healthy person. Where's the money? In the sick person
Sick
Mm-hmm.
person.
who is energy deficient,
Yeah.
who's struggling with energy. And it's what's his name? Jerry Tennant. Have you ever heard that name? Jerry Tennant? He's a
Mm-hmm.
famous, he was an ophthalmologist, got his training at Yale. So hey, what does he know? He just went to Yale, right? But he's brilliant, brilliant physician. And he's the guy that perfected laser surgery. He's the guy.
Wow.
And he was doing these surgeries, and unbeknownst to him, as he's doing the surgery, toxins are being released up into the air, and they zap him. He's like, he had to stop working for like 7 years. So he had to start all over. He had to learn how the body really works. But what he discovered is that um, when we are at a pH of 7, and the scale goes from 1 to 14, but when the pH is 7, guess what you can make inside the body? You can make water. You can turn oxygen into two molecules of water at the pH of 7. So then the mitochondria needs to be at the right pH.
Mm.
And what he realized is that the biggest production of energy is around the pH of 7.
Mm.
But if it drops off to 5 or 6 or 8 to 12 or whatever, the energy production falls off. Well, guess who wakes up when the energy production is down? all the pathogens.
Yeah.
Bacteria on the acidic side, parasites on the alkaline side, and they wake up and say, party time, because they're energy vampires and they feed off of low energy. So then what we decided to do within the root cause protocol is say, ignore the enemies, ignite the energy. And that's what the protocol is all about, is get people to stop doing the narrative, the nutritional narrative, which you all, I'm sure, understand, and get people to do things they've never been told to do before, like take copper, and bingo bongo, they start to feel better. The pathogens start to recede into the woodwork because they're always going to be in our body. It's just a question of, are they under wraps?
Yeah.
And once you start to crank up the energy machine, the water wheels crank in full tilt. You are hydrating your body. You don't need to be drinking half your body weight in water. You're making it.
Yeah.
And when people are drinking half their body weight in water, guess what's not in the water? Minerals. And guess what the water is that they're drinking does? It leaches their body of minerals because water wants minerals to complete its. So it's like all these people carrying around their water bottles, like,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's not a good thing.
Yeah.
And just getting people to realize how efficient and elegant our body is and the design of it, if you understand these principles.
Yeah.
Well, I can speak firsthand to what you're talking about with my own experience. We hiked on the Continental Divide Trail, and we were going through the Colorado Rockies, and you don't really dip
Oh,
much below 9,000, 10,000 feet. It's really exposed, a lot of sunlight, and so this day in particular, the sun was intense. It was hot, and I was drinking so much water. I probably drank 7 liters of water that day, and
wow.
I ended up getting heat exhaustion. I was vomiting at the end of the day because I wasn't replenishing myself with minerals. So it was a big learning lesson for me there.
There's a,
Yeah.
there's a, there's a celebrated study of ultra marathoners, and I can't remember the names now, but it was like a 180-mile race, which is insane. But it was done at altitude, which is like even more insane. And and usually men win those races, but this particular year, a woman entered the race, and all she did was suck on minerals,
Oh,
and
Ah,
she took like a day and a half off the course record because
amazing.
that's all the body wanted was the minerals. That wasn't the water,
yeah,
and
Yeah.
we all made that mistake. So that's a great lesson for people to learn about the importance of
absolutely.
minerals.
Yeah.
And what are the minerals? They're spark plugs.
Yeah.
They're what's us going.
Yeah.
It's just
There's
helping people recognize that.
Yeah, there's such a connection too with Tim Noakes, his book Waterlogged. Have you read his
Oh
book?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And the research on being in ketosis where you don't end up needing as much water to make the same amount of energy, if actually more energy. And you talk about that too, of our mitochondria actually evolving to be more efficient burning fat as fuel.
absolutely.
Yeah, and I think also just to kind of circle back to like what are those early signs? I know you've talked about the highs of metabolic syndrome,
Right,
right?
right.
And those
Yep,
are, yeah, if you want to, those things contributing or not contributing, but they are the signs of this issue with copper in minerals, maybe more than with
absolutely.
copper.
So metabolic syndrome is a serious problem on the planet,
Yeah.
especially in North America. And I think there was a study done a few years ago that basically said 93% of Americans are struggling with some form or some spectrum of metabolic dysfunction. That's a really damning assertion. 93%. It's like, wow. So metabolic syndrome is a big deal, and it involves many different components. But the five highs that you're referring to, Natalie, are um, high cholesterol.
Yeah.
So the formal name for that is hypercholesterolemia.
Hmm.
So just break it down. Hyper is high, cholesterol. Emia is blood. So there's high cholesterol in the blood. So high cholesterol is one. High glucose, right? High blood sugars. Then we've got high uricemia, hyperuricemia. That's high uric acid. It's a very serious problem. And the one with cholesterol is actually called hyperlipidemia, high lipids in the blood.
Yeah.
So we've got high fats, high sugar, high uric acid, hypertension,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
High blood pressure. And then the granddaddy of them all is called hyperinsulinemia.
Yes.
It's a really hard word to say. High insulin in the blood.
Yeah.
Those are considered the 5 highs of metabolic syndrome. But wait, there's more. It turns out those 5 factors are almost identical to what it takes to create kidney disease. So chronic kidney disease, I just learned this the other day. It's very common in people with diabetes.
Yes.
Very common. Well, the kidneys apparently don't like sugar.
Right.
They love fat. They don't like sugar. And so it would be good for your listeners to know that sugar has a connection with iron and fat has a connection with copper. Really powerful connection.
Yeah.
And I would go so far. I don't have scientific proof. I just use my intuition and my instinct. The mitochondria, I believe, historically, evolutionarily, are designed to burn fat, right? And how do you burn fat? You got to have copper. You can't burn fat without copper. All the beta oxidation enzymes, which break down fat, are all copper dependent. It's a good thing to know. You might teach that to your doctor. And I'm sure you guys drive a car or truck or something, right? How much sugar do you put into the gas tank? You don't put any sugar in the gas tank. What is petroleum? It's a fat.
Amazing.
And so here's a little factoid that absolutely blew me away. So that you've heard of Audible. I'm sure you probably have.
Yeah.
The books and stuff. Well, my Audible is Dr. Liz. When we're driving on trips or wherever, she reads articles, she reads books and things like this. And this particular book was the book Fat Chance, not Fat Chance. Oh my goodness. But by Robert Lustig.
I don't know that one.
Oh, wait a minute. Hold on. Let me cheat. Okay, it's from 2013, Fat Chance. So I should have just gone with my
Gut.
memory.
Yes.
My gut. But Dr. Liz is reading this passage. So the book is written in 2013, and he makes a reference to the fact that it takes twice as much insulin today, 2013, to burn the same amount of glucose it took 30 years ago. So we need twice as much insulin to burn the same amount of sugar that we did 30 years ago. I almost had an accident when she said it. I was like, what are you talking? What?
Yeah.
And so you dig into that, and there's a famous copper researcher named Leslie Clavet. It's a guy. He's a cardiologist, very gifted researcher. Has an MD from University of Wisconsin in Madison and a doctorate from Harvard. So what does he know? It's like, but he's really brilliant, and he wrote a very important article back in 1989 about sugar metabolism and copper deficiency. And what he noted in the article was a passage from a recognized pediatric textbook that was used in medical schools back in the day. And they were talking about children with Menkes disease, which you may or may not have heard of, but it's a genetic disorder that can't absorb copper. And these children these children die by the age of 3.
Oh, wow.
We can't live without copper. Again, copper's a toxin. Oh, but we can't live without it. They're like, so, but in the textbook, there's a very specific passage from his article. He said that children with Menkes disease are the most glucose intolerant people on planet Earth. Let that sink in. What that's telling us is that copper is involved in glucose regulation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right? Now put on your thinking cap. What happened in the early 1980s? Farming changed,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And they started spraying the fields with chemicals that do what? Bind up copper.
Mm.
And then we start to eat that food, and that residue is on our food, and it starts to bind up the copper in our body.
Mm-hmm.
And so then what is insulin? It's the backup plan when there's not enough copper to get the sugar into the cell.
Yeah.
I think we've been trained like circus bears to believe that insulin's running the sugar show.
Mm-hmm.
When in fact, it's when the body can't do it. Okay, we'll call in the heavy players and force the sugar into the what? The fat cell
Yeah.
where it's going to get stored, and you're going to get what? Obese.
Yeah.
And so again, it's just a simple passage in Robert Lustig's book that totally changed my understanding of where the problem was.
Yeah. Yeah.
So copper is really important for many different reasons,
Yeah.
not the least of which is make sure we're managing the sugars, because if you don't have copper, you're going to get metabolic syndrome.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Many articles that connect the dots between copper deficiency, retinol deficiency, vitamin A deficiency, and iron overload causing all these problems. And then a cousin to all this problem is non-alcoholic fatty liver disease.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the fastest growing liver disease on the planet. And it's like, but we know why now, because the body doesn't have the right balance of minerals.
Yeah.
And there's a point where people will hear me talk and say, it's got to be more complicated than that. No, it doesn't. Because we don't understand how powerful these minerals are,
Yeah.
or how prevalent they are, like rubisco
Mm-hmm.
or
Mm-hmm.
cytochrome C oxidase. We just take it for granted. We haven't even talked about the copper protein ceruloplasmin.
Yeah.
I was just meeting
Can we
with some colleagues today, and there was a lawyer here who didn't know any biology. And he said, "Are you talking? What is it? Superplasmin?" I said, "That's a good. We're going to trademark that. Super."
Yes.
So ceruloplasmin is again sky blue, back to that blue color again, and it I think is the brains of the outfit, because when it was discovered in the 1940s, but first really written about with rigor was in 1948 by Holmberg and Laurel, and they talked about its properties, which were amazing. But back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, there were 8 copper atoms inside it.
Hmm.
And then in the 75 through 2000, it's 7 copper atoms. And then starting in 2000 or so, now it's down to 6 copper atoms.
Mm.
It's like, so picture your car that's a V8 going down to a V6. It doesn't work the same way.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Mm-hmm.
what's happening. It's copper protein. It can work with 15 different substrates. So that means there's 15 different elements that it can work with and metabolize it to do something, to change that substrate. That's a really big deal.
Mm-hmm.
But even beyond that, there's 9 different enzyme expressions being expressed by this one protein.
Mm.
So the model for big pharma is one gene, one protein, one function. And so they perfected all these different drugs, understanding the gene, protein, function.
Mm-hmm.
Ceruloplasmin, one gene, one protein, 9 functions. Till can't have that. And it's a very disruptive element to their business model, but it's a very important part of our physiology that very few people know about.
Mm-hmm.
You ask the average practitioner, it doesn't matter what degree they've got, ask them to explain to you the properties of ceruloplasmin. And what they'll tell you is, well, I think it's involved in Wilson's disease. And that's as much as I can tell you. They
Interesting.
can't tell you that it's the master antioxidant protein in the human body.
Interesting.
The master antioxidant protein in the cell is glutathione. That the master antioxidant enzyme inside the mitochondria is melatonin.
Mm-hmm.
Guess what? You can't make melatonin, glutathione, or ceruloplasmin without copper. Oh, but it's a toxin, don't you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the whole thing. It's the flip of the truth to get to the narrative to keep people enslaved.
Yeah.
And so I regard copper as it's the mineral of sovereignty.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if, I wonder if people think it's such a toxin because I heard you say that ceruloplasmin drops copper out of the cells when blood sugars are too high. And so if you're getting copper levels tested in your blood, it's going to look like your copper's high.
Right?
If you have high blood sugar, if you're, pre-diabetic or have chronic inflammation, infections that are leading you
That's the
stress.
glad you brought that up. It's a very important biological event. So when blood sugar rises above 120, hyperglycemia gets above 120, which is that's actually pretty high, but it can go it can go up into
Way
400.
higher. Yeah.
Yeah, way higher. But when it gets to 120, it blows up ceruloplasmin. And guess what gets released? The copper. It comes out like diarrhea. Sorry for the too much information, but it comes out. Now let's stop and think. Why would the body release the copper? Let's go back to Robert Lustig. Let's go back to Leslie Clave. Oh, we need that copper to put the sugar back in the cell.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And what we've done is we've transposed that biological reaction and turned it into a negative, when in fact, maybe it's the smartest thing the body can do.
Yeah.
Or when there's an infection or inflammation, as you're referring to, who are the Marines of the white blood cells? Well, it's the neutrophils. The neutrophils are the first responders. Now put on your thinking cap. What do you think activates neutrophils? It's called copper. And so in an infection, ceruloplasmin realizes, oh, we got a problem. Let's release copper to activate the neutrophils, who are the first responders, who are going to do what? Oh, it's called respiratory burst. And they take oxygen and they turn it into a poison to try to kill the pathogen. And that process, that respiratory burst, is copper dependent. So maybe the body knows what it's doing. Maybe the body has such an incredible level of intelligence. And one of my colleagues down the street, he's a PhD in informatics and library science. Just amazing mind. And he was teaching me about intelligence. What is IQ? And this is a conversation that's only like a week old. And it's like, intelligence is having goals. An entity that has goals is intelligent.
Yeah.
Well, if you've got 1,046 amino acids, which is what ceruloplasmin has, and 8 copper atoms, there's no other protein with that many of anything, but it's got 8 copper atoms, and it can express 9 different enzyme expressions. That's a really intelligent element. It has goals that we don't understand because we live in a world of dis-ease,
Mm-hmm.
believe that there is no disease. It doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing that exists is energy deficiency that then creates symptoms that we then use to communicate to the doctor. And then they tell us, oh, you have diabetes. And it gets tattooed on our forehead. And then we go home and we look up, what is diabetes? Well, that's exactly what I've got. Those are the exact symptoms I've got. And
Right.
it becomes self-reinforcing.
Right.
That's the game. That's the game of medicine.
Yeah.
And then we fall prey to the medications, and we
Mhm.
don't hear about the natural side of healing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The
I would
mere
love if we could.
deficiency.
We're about at the end of the hour here, and before we wrap up, I would love to maybe hear, and we'll have you back for a part two, maybe part three, because there's, as you were talking about, there's just so much to expand on here. But in parting, could you maybe give the listener like five central focuses or steps, maybe three, because I've been hearing reducing stress,
Right?
reducing glyphosate exposure. But if the listener could walk away from this conversation with like five practical steps to
Yeah.
take,
Right.
what would you
Right.
leave them with to help
No,
copper?
absolutely. No, I think that's a wonderful recommendation. Um, we gotta be smart about our food, and it's hard. I mean, ideally we should be buying it from farmers. If we can't buy it from farmers, we should certainly be buying it from the perimeter of the store, nothing in the center of the store. And I think what we really tell people within the root cause protocol is follow the principles that Weston A. Price developed. And that's
Mhm.
the tremendous wisdom in his research. And what a gift to humanity was his
Yeah.
focus on the importance of fat, the importance of minerals, the importance of
Mhm.
just real food. And I think
Mhm.
that's a mainstay principle. Um, Make sure that you're drinking water that has minerals in it.
Mhm. Yeah.
It's not complicated.
Mhm.
And and if the bottle says smart water, it's not smart. It's not, you're not smart. That's what it's doing. And so you've got to get water that is properly mineralized, or you need to mineralize it yourself. And if you have a particular interest in magnesium, as many people do, find a Polish market. The water on the planet that has the highest concentration of magnesium is in Poland. I don't know why, but it is. Polish spring water is amazing for restoring magnesium. So that would be very, very important. Um, I would encourage people to track down the protocol, the root cause protocol.
Mhm.
And um, the website is rcp123.org. And go to the resources and just look up the protocol. And there's a series of stops and starts.
Mhm.
Just do the stops. Just do the stops. A lot of people feel so much better if they stop the narrative that's not helping us, because the narrative is not building energy.
Yeah.
The narrative breaks us down and makes us more dependent.
Yeah.
So that would be step number three. Um, Step number four, got to deal with your stress. Here's the thing. Like I said, when you have stress in your world, you're going to have oxidative stress in your body. And that's a fancy word for rust. So when iron and oxygen interact, they create rust. They can't help it. That's the way they're designed. They're drawn to each other. And thank God they're drawn to each other, because that's what carries oxygen and hemoglobin. It's that iron molecule, the waiter, carrying all that
Mhm.
oxygen around our body. And if that oxidative stress builds up in the body, it's going to create more symptoms. And then we're going to start to worry about our health. And that worry is going to turn into fear. We spell it differently within the protocol. It's Fe-AR. So you see the symbol for iron. And when you're in a state of fear, you become a magnet for iron. And people need to understand that that when you're in a state of fear, you're in a sympathetic state.
Mm.
You cannot heal when you're in a sympathetic nervous system. You've got to go parasympathetic. And so we encourage people to do some kind of emotional release work, whether it's EFT, motion code, body code, EMDR, ITP, integrated processing technique, whatever floats your boat. Release the fear that's keeping you trapped in the sympathetic state that won't allow you to heal.
Yes.
And so then step number 5, I would say, is start doing regular blood donations.
Mm.
And there's only one way to get rid of excess iron in the human body. There's no enzymatic function. There's no hormonal function. There's no mechanism to say, you got too much iron, let's get rid of it. We are designed to hold on to iron, except with blood loss.
Mm.
Now, what's important for the listener to understand, Andrew, this is kind of unsettling for guys, but there's only 2 reasons why women outlive men. Only 2 reasons. Women are smarter. That's a biological fact. And women have no, it's true. I'm not playing video. Just accept it.
I
Just
accept
move
it.
along.
I accept
Okay.
it.
But the second thing is women have 40 years of blood loss. They're dumping iron for 40 years every month.
Mm.
Women have been conditioned to make it icky and it's terrible, and I can't believe I have to go through all this pain and discomfort. Well, if you have copper in your body, it isn't painful. It's very regular. It comes like clockwork. You should be synced to the full moon, not the new moon. Most women are synced to the new moon. Why is that important? Because when do parasites lay their eggs? With the full moon. What do parasites need in order to survive? Must have iron. What did Mother Nature design women to do? Dump iron starting on the full moon to lower the incidence of parasites so they don't get passed on to the next generation.
Mm.
I've talked to probably 8,000 women in the last 16 years. How many women started their menstrual cycle on the full moon?
Very little.
1.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
1 woman. Everyone else is some variation of that. Most women are on the new moon, which means it's the exact opposite of what Mother Nature wanted.
Yeah.
And so blood donation, even as for a woman with a menstrual cycle, becomes an important event to lower the iron footprint, because then you're lowering the incidence of infection and you're honoring the natural way that the body works. So those would be the 5 steps that I would start with. I mean, we could go on,
That's great.
but
Those are
that would
great.
be 4 or 5 to get people started.
Very good for our first
Yeah, well, I think this is a good
interview.
place to wrap up, and we'll look forward to a part 2. Before
Can't wait.
before we end here, you mentioned
The root cause protocol.
rcp.org. Are there any other
RCP 123.
123? Okay, I missed that.
We're on social media, all over social media, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, what have you. What's the? Well, they're just we're everywhere. We have a community, an RCP community. When you go to the resources tab, you can learn about that. For people who are really intrigued by what we've been talking about, we have an institute, and we're signing up people literally as we speak during the month of June for the next course that starts. I think it's like June 9th or 10th, or July 9th or 10th. And it's a 16-week program that people find absolutely fascinating. And it draws 3 types of people. We have practitioners with a license. We have people who are practitioners that don't have a license. And then we just have people like the 3 of us, just want to help. I want to do something to be a guide for people to learn how to get healthy. And so we have and a lot of moms have come through that course. It's really cool. They just want to heal their family.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have a lot of fun with that class. And I think that, and then people want to order supplements or whatever, that's available, but that's not really what we're really more of an educational platform. And I think people have been benefited mightily by the information that we share. And like we were chatting at the beginning, I think we've really helped people question the narrative.
Yeah.
That it's okay to say, is there more to the story?
Yes.
And I think it's helped them gain greater confidence that maybe these alternative approaches have validity and value. It's just you got to be able to have the courage to do it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, thanks
Thank
again,
you.
Morley. We'll look forward to part 2, and we'll link all those links you mentioned in the show notes as well for those who are interested.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to have the conversation.